Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I think we're webcasting this live, and we'll also post the results on the web. Liz, are we started yet? Yeah. I should start by introducing myself. I'm Kent Hughes. I run a program here on America and the global economy, and it's that focus on the long-run future of the American economy that's led us to become really students of the Einstein professors here, 4 of whom are on the panel today. I'd like to welcome you all to the Woodrow Wilson Center. Those of you who are new, new to the center, let me say a word or two about it. The center was established in 1968 as a living memorial to Woodrow Wilson. The Congress, in debating how to honor him, decided against one more marble statue or one more monument and created this living memorial. In the assignment that the Congress gave the center was to bring together the two sides of Wilson's life. Wilson is the only president to have earned a PhD. He was quite a prominent political scientist in his era. 1 or 2 of his books, in fact, are still used in contemporary political science classes. He went on to be, in addition, a notable professor, the president of Princeton University, then lured into politics, governor of New Jersey, and a 2-term president. The Congress asked us to bring that academic side together with the people who are actually making and influencing policy. So over a course of a year, we may have 150 people that come to do research here. Some are in fact academics, some are people from a more active role in policy making. We've had ex-members of Congress come here. And that effort is very much what we're hoping to do today. And before I launch into that and introduce our panelists briefly, I just want to recognize Liz Byers. Liz, would you stand up there? Liz is really the brains and the effort behind so much of what the program on America and the global economy does. I should say she also is a lead person on our Wilson Center on the Hill program. We long ago discovered that it's very hard, given the congressional schedule, to get members or senior staff off the Hill and to an event like this. So, in fact, we do a number of events on the Hill and have been fortunate to have had some events on the Hill with Einstein panelists. Very well attended and much appreciated. We hope to repeat that this year. This is likely to be the year where the No Child Left Behind or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is renewed. There's going to be, I'm sure, a lot of debate on it. It's interesting that Mr. Boehner, who's now the Speaker of the House, at one point was chair of the relevant committee and has a strong interest in education himself. Well, let me introduce our distinguished panelists. They are to my right, far right, Lindsay Knippenberg. You all have their bios in front of you. She is a Michigan person, has a distinguished academic record, as you can see, but although she doesn't look like someone who would tangle with polar bears, was on the Polar Trek program in Antarctica. So she could do polar without the bears, I think, in that case. To my left is Terrie Rust. Terrie is actually a technology
education educator.
Education educator. Very good. And you've also taught technology, I gather.
Yes.
And she is from the great state of Arizona, which is a stunningly beautiful state, which can show you how there's a little bit of every state somewhere in Arizona. To my far left is Mike Town, who is from the state of Washington. He is in the western part of Washington, I guess in Microsoft country, is that?
That would be correct.
And teaches science and environmental science. Then to my right is Steve Schreiner, who in a middle school teaches science and technology. Very good combination. He's from the other part of Washington State, Spokane, which is east of the Cascades. And having gone to high school in Pendleton, Oregon, which is the similar eastern part of Oregon, I have some idea of what the world of Spokane is like. Well, today we're really focusing on, in a sense, how to measure success, but also how to scale it. That there are an enormous array of experiments going on across the United States. Many in what you would think of as more traditional public schools. There's a wide variety of charter schools. There's competition among privately funded schools. And the question for us, of course, is what works. If you look at the latest PISA results, the Program on International Student Assessment, the United States as a whole did not come out very well. But there was enormous variety within the United States. And I believe I'm picking a couple of the right examples. If Massachusetts and Minnesota had been independent countries, they would have ranked quite high. So again, the question is, what is it in those states that has helped lead to success, and are there lessons there that could be scaled to the rest of the country? Well, let me turn to our distinguished panel, and I'd like to say that over the last 3 years, we, and I think I speak for Liz Byers as well, have learned an enormous amount. That the Einstein Fellows who were picked for their outstanding teaching in mathematics or science, and they picked them from the whole spectrum of K through 12 education, although most are almost surely from middle and high schools. They also, to a person, have thought systemically about what works, what doesn't, how innovations develop and are introduced, perhaps not well thought through, or perhaps not well pursued, or some that really work well, and they have some thoughts about why they worked well. And that's a sense of what we want to get today. Well, I'm going to fall back on the easiest possible order here and ask people to speak alphabetically. So let me start with Lindsay.
Thank you, Kent. Hi, everyone. So thank you, Kent, for inviting us here today. We really appreciate it. So like Kent said, my name is Lindsay Knippenberg, and I am a high school teacher from the Detroit area. I teach environmental science and biology there. Besides teaching responsibilities, I'm also an advisor for the Environmental Club, for the Envirothon team, for Science Olympiad, and our Link crew there. So today I'll touch on some of those programs as we talk about scalability. As a teacher, I've had kind of two passions. That the first passion that I have is for spreading my enthusiasm for science to my students and to inspire them to go into different careers in science. In that pursuit, I've been all over the world, and like Kent said, to Antarctica. And I've done that to prove to my students, because we're more in an urban area, that they can have goals and that take them beyond the city bus line, and that they can really do those things. My other passion has been to get kids outside, specifically kids in the city, to give them those experiences in the outdoors to connect them to nature. And that has led my students and I all over Michigan through swamps and forests and farm fields all over the place, which has been some really cool opportunities for them. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to kind of share my experiences with you today. So thank you very much for inviting me here.
Well, it's trekking through swamps. Some cynics would say that prepares you well for a year in Washington.
There you go.
Let me turn next to Terrie Rust. Terrie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I too want to thank you, Dr. Hughes. It's been a pleasure to be invited to contribute to the forum this morning. My teaching experience spans nearly 25 years in both public and private education, encompassing grades 5 through 12 and also community college, teaching in regular classrooms as well as homebound students. I've even taught a TV course, which you might consider an early version of online instruction. Prior to my coming to D.C. for the fellowship, I taught for the last 18 years at a K through 8 elementary school in Peoria, Arizona, in a district currently comprised of 31 elementary schools and 7 high schools. The course I taught was called Technology Life Careers, or TLC for short. The title was representative of the original design, which incorporated a combination of technological education, life skills, and career preparation. TLC is a career and technical education course for 7th and 8th graders and has covered technological education, computer skills, engineering concepts, problem solving, workplace skills, which are now being called 21st century skills, and career education since its inception in 1992. I was fortunate to be part of the original cohort of teachers of that program. Students are required to take the year-long course during both their 7th and 8th grade years, and this extended enrollment time offers teachers an opportunity to provide a deeper level of instruction to students. When the program was first conceptualized during the 1991-92 school year, 4 campuses introduced the model of the program to their students. In August of 1992, it was scaled for inclusion in all 21 district elementary schools. To this day, the program continues with exceptional success due to the curriculum coordination and sharing of teaching strategies and methods between what is now 32 elementary TLC teachers on 31 campuses. The TLC program has received international interest, and the model has been studied for scalability in other nations, including Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea.
Have other states visited and taken a look?
Yes.
And has it been replicated in any other states?
Not specifically replicated, but our program has been used as a basis for other programs elsewhere.
That's very interesting. Steve Schreiner, what are your thoughts?
Thanks for having us, Kent. Thanks, everybody, for coming. So I'm a representative of a somewhat different school, and I'm kind of unusual in the teaching profession in that I work at a public school, but it is not a public school as most of you have experienced in your own life. So I work at a non-traditional middle school. And the reason it's non-traditional is that we use different teaching strategies and we use different teaching philosophies than traditional schools would. And the story behind the school, it's called West Valley City School, and it's based in the West Valley School District in eastern Washington State. And roughly a decade ago, the district leadership recognized that there was a major issue among the middle school population in our area. And that was that the transition between elementary school and high school was not very successful for most students. That kids generally had a great elementary experience. They felt like they enjoyed school. They liked coming to school. They generally connected with teachers. And then middle school happens, and things start to change. And by the time kids ended middle school and moved on to high school, they were disengaged. They weren't interested in coming to school. They weren't interested in doing assignments or learning or essentially being part of the education system. And so the district leadership in my district decided something needed to be done. And so they put a team on it, and one of the visionary guys in my district came up with this model, and that would be that it would be a school founded on personal relationships with students. And so that's the core of our belief, is that every teacher has a responsibility to get to know every student in the building personally and make a personal investment in their future. And that has positives and it has negatives, and I can talk about those a little later today. And the model that we use is not just that it's built on personal relationships, but our education is also built on project-based learning and experiential education. So it's called City School because the last hour of every school day, every day, is devoted to a city simulation experience. So every kid in the building has a job. We have a cafe, we have an aquaculture center, we have a greenhouse, we have a police department and a city hall, elected city council, a mayor, and every student in the building has a job. It could be at a low level, they might be a dishwasher in the cafe. It could be a high level, the mayor position. It doesn't matter, but every kid has to apply. They write a letter of interest, they fill out an application, they create a resume, they interview for positions. Some kids are hired, some kids aren't hired. But eventually every kid finds a position in the school. And so the entire goal of the program is that we transition kids from elementary school to high school so that they'll find success, so that they'll be engaged in school, so they'll enjoy coming to school. And in many ways, those are the measurements that we use. It's not necessarily about test scores, although that's important to us, of course, but it's about whether or not kids are interested in learning and interested in going and furthering their education. So I'll talk more about it later. Thanks.
Very interesting. The urban simulation, does that mean something like Sim City or
Well, it's not computer-based at all. So in a way, we have all of those components. There's a few things that we've experimented with over the years. We've tried doing a nonprofit, city way is what we call it. And so that's a chance for kids to do things that are not necessarily city-related, but like an NGO of sorts. I'll talk more about it later.
Oh, that's very interesting. Well, now we're going to go from urban to town, Mike Town in this case. Mike?
That was very clever, Kent.
I had one cup of coffee. I'm feeling pretty good this morning.
Thanks also, Kent, for hosting today. This is great. It's an important issue, and it's really good to look at this from a real kind of global perspective. So I teach AP Environmental Science and another course which I'll mention in a second in a suburban school outside of Seattle, Washington. The AP Environmental Science course that we initiated there, just to kind of give you some statistical background on it, about 50% of our students take it. It's a average high school, so about 200 kids. 99% of them take the test, 92% of them pass the test. The national average is 51%, and we've maintained those averages for over a decade. And so we've been able to scale that up to the other schools in our district, and to outside schools outside of the district. The other course I teach is a course called Environmental Engineering and Sustainable Design, which like my AP Environmental Science course is a CTE course, dual credited, so there's college credit opportunities, and that course has all of a sudden gotten a lot of interest for developing it into other schools around our state level, and we've been doing a lot of stuff in sustainability in the state of Washington. But perhaps the best example of sustainability and how I can be somewhat helpful to this panel is that I started a program a number of years ago, which was called the Cool Schools Challenge. And Cool School Challenge, it's pretty nationally renowned now, but when it initiated, the goal was to have schools measure their carbon footprints and reduce them down to Kyoto levels. So for those who know, the mayor of Seattle initiated a challenge around 2006, 2007 for voluntary compliance to Kyoto levels. And I came up with the idea that since in most rural schools and even most suburban schools, the single largest stationary carbon point source of pollution is the local high school, just because of the size of it, that in order to fulfill the vision of the mayor, we needed to, get the schools involved, not only to help the cities reduce their carbon footprint, but also because of the, the educational opportunity and the value that is as a, really great example of relative STEM course. So that program, went kind of viral. It's all over the United States now. We just initiated workshops in India just last week, and it's an example of of how teacher initiated scalability can happen, because a lot of times when we talk about sustainable these scalable programs, they're usually very top down, and kind of someone says, well, the school should do this program because we came up with this great idea. But realistically, there are thousands of teachers across the United States who every year come up with extremely incredible, innovative ideas in their classrooms to meet some of the problems that their individual students face. And those programs, in many cases, never leave that particular classroom. And the problem is that if we think that the states are the great laboratories for government, in regards to coming up with programs that can be replicated, the teachers are an untapped resource for scalable projects.
And how might we tap into that mother lode of ideas? Is there is there an existing organization that might be a little more proactive?
There really isn't, and I could go on forever about the difficulty of finding a way of taking the Cool Schools program to the national level without resources. But I would make this suggestion. if we developed in this country a nonprofit organization, call it the Innovators Project or something like that, and let's say that what it did every year was come up with an innovator prize for teacher innovators, kind of like the MacArthur Genius Awards, found the best 5 to 10 teacher-initiated innovative projects in the United States, and then created a way of branding, marketing, and disseminating those programs so that they could be given to other teachers across the United States for free, then we would have something there that would have a very, very, very good bang for the buck. And it's very easy to do, and you could do it, you could initiate it, very, very, very quickly. I think one of the things that we're seeing in high school education is beyond 10th grade and the 11th and 12th grade year, beyond standardized testing, we need to open up the diversity of programs that students can take. We need more CTE classes. We need more specialty elective classes. And some of the best ways to do that is for individual teachers to develop that curriculum, pilot it in their particular class, and then export it out to other teachers across the United States.
So you could see a world in which you'd have a library of choices. And if you were teaching perhaps outside Detroit, you'd have one focus. And if you were teaching in Arizona, you might have another set of challenges. And then you could pick the program off the shelf that you might want to try then in a particular class.
Public domain.
That's very interesting. Well, as we started mentioning, that No Child Left Behind, or ESEA, will be certainly debated and I think renewed over this next 2 years. There's been a lot of questioning about how we measure success before we think about what we want to scale or not scale. What are your thoughts about the current emphasis on particular kinds of tests? Should they be used to track students over time? Are they useful for indicating a need for intervention? Let's say a particular child's lagging behind in reading, that there may be some extra effort there. What are your thoughts about how we ought to measure success before we start to scale it?
I'd like to address that. I believe that the one-test-fits-all method is very ineffective. And when we look at all that surrounds the testing process and who makes up the questions and how tests are administered, there really is a lot involved in the student perspective of pass or fail and how is this going to affect my future and so on. And it really doesn't evaluate student success. If you can say, yeah, I did well on this test, no, I didn't do well. I believe that success, especially when you're looking at scalable models, we've got one method isn't going to fit all either. If you've got a program that works well in one school or in one district or state, whatever, doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be successful as well, just picking it up and moving it somewhere else. Just like corporate America has a business culture, schools and classrooms have cultures. And that culture is difficult to pass along in a package. And so when we talk about what is student success and what is a success in a scalable program, I think you have to look at what is the situation that program is being put into. There are lots of other models that are successful testing measures, including student self-evaluation, student portfolios, project-based assessments, which give a better picture of what student success looks like in a classroom on a daily basis versus a test that is administered on 1 or 2 days and could be affected by a number of extrinsic, intrinsic factors.
And if I'm Joe taxpayer and I'm worried about American schools. I've just read the article, a headline, students lagging in science, 25th in math, whatever. And I say, well, what's going on in the schools? How do I know that they're doing the best they can?
Are you addressing that to me?
No,
or
just
anyone?
to anyone. Yeah.
Would anyone like to pick that up, or you want me to address it?
Well, I think one of the things that you can look as far as other ways to measure the success of scalable programs, especially in STEM fields. When people take a look at their reported statistics, okay, well that says one story, but there's another story that's embedded in there, and that's the high dropout rate that we have, and the achievement gap that's associated with it. And one of the things that we can do to increase the test scores and also increase the STEM possibilities of increasing, the pipeline, is that the low-hanging fruit is those students who are dropping out of the system that actually could be very, very good people that could be in the STEM fields. So the course that I teach in environmental engineering and sustainable design is not, a college-based course. It's a course in which we're trying to reach the type of kids that when I was a kid growing up were kind of the shop kids, the kids who, used to, so some of the best innovators in the United States, are folks who turn wrenches. I mean, realistically, they understand how things work. And what we do in the United States sometimes is we say, well, if you're gifted, you have to score high on some sort of standardized test. But what we really need to do is we need to identify those talented innovators early on who have spatial gifts and who have other talents that, we can measure. And then we need to find programs and develop programs for them to keep them in schools and to provide that, that pipeline that's out there. I think that's one thing that we don't do very well in the United States. And some people will say, well, the other countries, by the 10th grade, they've exported these kids out to trade schools, and they just measure the kids who, aren't going into that. And I think that if we're going to believe in this whole system about educating all kids, then we got to incorporate career and technical education in our K-12 system, starting, in the middle schools and starting to enable those kids to find a comfortable niche. Because if you do, not only will they test out better, which will, soothe a little bit of, mom and pop out there in the community who's concerned about their tax dollars, but it also provides this shovel-ready potential employment opportunities for entry levels into fields like alternative energy and the other, new growing economies of the future.
Does project-based learning play into that kind of preparation?
Well, the immediate reaction to a low test score for a school is going to be, well, our kids performed low in math, so let's give them more math instruction. And then the next year, the kids do a little better, but it's still not where we expect them to be, so we say more math, more language arts. And so the idea that we've taken is that that is not an effective way of treating a problem. It just spending more time on a project or more time on a class isn't necessarily a way to get kids to perform better. So the strategy that my building and many others throughout the United States use is a focus on student projects. Now, that doesn't mean we're immune from testing. We're a public school just like any other public school, and so we have the same requirements in my building as we do in every other public school throughout the state of Washington. However, we do get different results. A lot of it is tough to discern because our kids opt into our programs, so they make a choice or their parents make a choice that they want to attend this type of school rather than a traditional middle school. And so it's a real challenge to figure out, did the work that we did here in this building have an actual impact on the kids, or was it that the kids came to us already ready for a model like this? My intuitive sense is that the work that we're doing in my project-based school makes a big difference in kids' lives. We hear stories all the time about kids hating school, not getting up, fighting their parents at home, and all of a sudden, after several months in our program, they're interested in coming to school. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're performing at a level that the state or the nation would say is the level we want them to be at. And so that's a really tough duality for us, is that we have state and federal expectations, and yet we know that if we don't get these kids interested in the first place, they're never going to meet those expectations. So we have to start from somewhere. In my mind, project-based learning is a great way to get kids interested. You're tying in multiple disciplines, you're tying in life experience, you're tying in things that aren't necessarily measured on a standardized test. And yet we see results. We see that kids are interested in presenting their work to adults or at conferences that are held locally or even at the state level. And those types of experiences wouldn't necessarily happen in a classroom that's focused solely on preparing kids for a standardized test.
Are you able to use the project-based learning to complement, say, traditional disciplines like physics or perhaps a science class or a math class, that suddenly the students are applying what seems abstract? I remember my own experience with early algebra, where you were rowing toward London at 6 miles an hour, and the river was going 3 miles an hour in the other direction. How long did it, there was wasn't clear to anyone why we were rowing to London to begin with, as opposed to, well, my experience with FIRST robotics, where you're actually trying to build something, and there's a lot of, as you put it, interest.
For me, the challenge of standards is that whenever we design new standards, we tend to get a panel of experts in the field, whether it's mathematics or science. And every expert has their own field of expertise, and they say, well, it's so important that kids understand cell biology, or man, it's so important that kids understand linear algebra. And before long, we have this enormous assemblage of things that are just essential in the subject area. In project-based learning, to be honest, you have to give up some of that and realize that it is not necessarily that kids are going to be able to show learning in every single one of those areas. And I, as a teacher, and the others on my staff, I believe, I can't speak necessarily for them, we're okay with that because we know that there is deep content knowledge in certain areas and that kids know how to apply their knowledge. So math has always been a real challenge for us for project-based learning. We design a lot of programs around finance because we think that's a thing that it's essential for kids to understand. They need to know how to balance checkbooks or calculate interest or understand concepts like that. Things like rowing to another nation, it is a definite challenge to help kids understand how to do that through a project. And yet, I would say that the learning that happens from project-based learning lasts a lot longer than it would from just traditional instruction.
And my program is also project-based learning, and one of the main things that businesses say today, that they're not as interested with high school graduates coming out and being able to do calculus or whatever, as much as they are able to have those skills, those people skills, what are now being called 21st century skills, the teamwork, the cooperative skills, the skills that are used in a workplace. Because although the background of a student is important in their educational background, these are skills that have to be taught through projects, through cooperative learning in schools, and oftentimes don't get taught because of the focus on a particular lesson concept that has to be taught, rather than going through a project to teach that particular concept and then allowing those other skills that are extremely important. When you talk about success, are we talking about are students able to go out into the world after they graduate high school and participate successfully as an adult? That really is a measure of success that I think we want all our students to achieve.
Lindsay, in your comment, you also emphasized inspiration, and that getting out of the urban area, trekking through a swamp, seeing this variety of real-life science, in a sense, around you, has been an effective approach. How would you adapt that to, say, Arizona?
I mean,
no swamps in Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their environments, and a big thing that I do through my students is through the Envirothon program, and that is pretty much, I think, in every state. Every state has that. Basically, what that program does, it's a competitive team, and so in the environmental sciences, there's wildlife, forestry, aquatic biology, all these different subjects that the students compete as a team of 5, and they go to these different environments, and they take the test together. But it's all hands-on, so they may be sampling the stream or measuring trees or doing different quadrants. So it's really cool, and especially for my students, we go and we know that we're the only team from our county, and we know that we're not going to be the best. But I just go with the fact that my kids are going to see these different careers in action, and a lot of the different park personnel and the Department of Natural Resources are there, and they show the kids what they do and they teach about it. So for me, maybe it's not about the awards and that my kids like suck up all this content, but it's more of the experience and seeing that there are careers outside of those city lines that they haven't gone past, and that, I mean, that's could be used in any state, anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let me just take the privilege of the chair to ask a couple more questions, then we'll open it up to this very erudite set of participants. I did want to ask about some of the programs that seem to have had great success in difficult environments, and the KIP program, the Knowledge is Power program, often comes to mind. At the same time, it's my impression that while they have a Japanese-like structure, long school days, high expectations, often Saturday classes, breaking up the school year in the summer so children don't lose what they've learned in the prior year, they also ask an awful lot of their teachers. From what I've read, they're often on call to help the student at that time. And that works great when you're 25. And I think of myself many years ago working on Capitol Hill, great 12-hour, 14-hour days. It's great. You had the illusion that you were contributing in some way, and maybe in a minor way that you were. But at the same time, life changes, and suddenly you have a whole mix of responsibilities, children of your own, perhaps elderly parents. You're involved in the community in a different way. Is that model, does the KIP model scalable, do you think?
Well, the KIP model is one that I think has had its success because you have a tremendous buy-in from the community that it participates in. Unfortunately, some of us are in states that have difficulty with our districts alone, let alone trying to get our district, our state, to buy into something like that. There's a cost involved. The cost not only of time, but in resources, in the cost of the conversion of everything. And the KIP model has had its success because of the buy-in of everyone, and the idea that this is money well spent for that situation. Would it work in every place? That's really to be seen, because if you have a state like mine that doesn't put a value on education as much as some other communities do, then coming up with those resources and the commitment to follow through on the models that have to that are going to meet the needs of the students and really produce results is going to really be an issue.
I would suggest, and maybe that this has been done, but I'm unaware of it. The KIP program's been around a long enough time now that you could probably get some tracking data on the teachers in terms of longevity. I mean, how many of the original teachers are still around? How many have moved on? Why have they moved on? And you could compare that to, maybe a national average. I think Terrie's right that on a national, KIP can't be extended as a national model. I mean, that's just completely non-possible, mainly because of funding issues as well as other ones. I think that if there was enough support for targeted areas, because KIP is kind of a targeted program, that if funding could be developed, and I would probably say it would have to come from foundation money or private sector money, there's probably other areas in the United States that it could be expanded into.
And I would be hesitant to say that this is only happening in KIPP schools, that there are a lot of teachers in this room that spend a lot of their time and take a vested interest in their students, and they're very important to us. And so we're all of varying age, so I don't know if it's so much of an age thing. There are things in your life that do come up, but there are a lot of teachers all across the nation in public schools and all over the place that are investing large amounts of time in their students to ensure their success.
And my mother was a first grade teacher, and I remember her going over lesson plans. I mean, it was not a 9 to 3 or whatever, 8 to 3,
Definitely not.
3 kind of job, and it is for certainly, I think, for her and many other people that she was teaching with, it was just not only a career, it was also a calling.
Yeah.
And that clearly made a difference. Well, the one question that's come up, this will be my last question, then I'll turn it open, is the how important for many groups the after-school activities can be, both as in terms of engaging the students, and as you pointed out, the project-based learning can inspire the students. Just as an anecdote, talking to a woman who taught AP math, and she just noticed that they were all good students, they all did well, but the ones that were engaged in FIRST robotics actually did better and seemed to have more enthusiasm. That was that kind of that inspiration element, and I suspect that's true of the Envirothon and the Olympiad and those other kinds of activities. Should we start to recognize that extra time that the after-school activities take? Should you be treated as if you were the basketball coach?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
I thought I'd get some agreement on
One suggestion, for it, because, obviously there's a finance issue, and, you can do studies and say FIRST Robotics, has all these added values, but I think you could expand that and say it has almost all the after-school enrichment programs do. One of the ideas that we've been talking about a little bit among some of the Einstein fellows is that there's this notion, PCAS has it out there, as a STEM Master Teacher Corps. And, one of the problems with that is that if you were to pay master teachers that were STEM teachers more money, and PCAS throws out a $15,000 or so, actual stipend, it's difficult to fly for some of my other teachers in the building, because, there are science teachers, there are other teachers in the building who are master teachers too, and devote huge amounts of time as well. And so, it brings that little bit of inequity. But one of the ways that you can make it so that it's justifiable, I think, is that a lot of these after-school enrichment activities are STEM related. They don't really transfer to the other disciplines as well. I mean, yes, there's National History Day, and that's an issue that we could talk about afterwards. But if you said that a STEM master teacher, that one of the criteria of a STEM master teacher is that they have to do some sort of enrichment activity for their students in order to justify a component of that money, then you would see all of a sudden that lots of schools would start developing FIRST Robotics or Science Bowls or Science Olympiad teams, because there would all of a sudden be a little bit of incentive in there, and it would allow the master teacher to have that type of perspective of value that the local football coach has. And the money's out there. I mean, I just saw I think it was the Post this weekend. There's a football stadium that they're building in a high school in Texas that has a $60 million price cost. I don't know if any of you guys saw that, but it was, it was out there. $60 million. That's an awful lot of money that for something that has a value in that community, right? Mm. So why doesn't STEM have the same type of value? Why doesn't the people of that same community want to build a $60 million STEM center at their high school? Well, it's one of the reasons why is because STEM teachers are looked upon as volunteers. Coaches are looked upon as employees.
Very, very well put.
I've always felt that the after-school programs do not necessarily have to be after school. It would be essential in reforming our schools to bring those programs into the classroom. And we've experimented with this in my own building. There's a program run by the United States Army called the E-Cyber Mission, and it's not that they're training future warriors, it's that they're trying to get kids interested in STEM fields. And so the general premise is that kids have to identify a local problem in their community and develop a solution using science, math, technology, and engineering, and figure out a way to make essentially their local community better. And so my school has brought that into our curriculum, and that was a focus for 3 months within our building across all subject areas. There was class time devoted to this, and it's not just like an hour a day or something. I mean, we were devoting hours and hours every day. Essentially, that was our instruction for students for several months. And so we made a conscious decision that every kid in this building is going to participate in this. And it doesn't have to be eCyber Mission. It could be First Robotics or First Lego League or any of the great programs that already exist that we often think, oh, well, that's outside of school. You know, kids come to school and they do science class and they go to math class and they go to language arts class. There's no need that it has to be that way. We have enormous flexibility in our school systems that we could bring something like that in. As long as our leadership and our teachers are behind it, it would be successful in our programs.
Very interesting. Terrie, you...
Yeah, I think when we talk about scalability and success, these what you referred to as after-school programs, which Steve said are now coming into the classroom, can be held up as exceptional models. One of the programs that I participated in was a Future City competition, which is sponsored in conjunction with National Engineers Week. And this particular competition is absolutely scalable. It's $25 for a school to enroll, to participate. And for that $25, they get free software. They get connected with an engineer mentor who works with the students in developing programs for a future city. And we're talking a future city 150 years out into the future. Dealing with particular problems that have to do with water quality and food supply and resource control. Just a number of things. There's a specific task that the students have to tackle each year. And they have to do all this. They do a computer simulation, and then they actually build a scale model out of recycled materials. So here we're talking about a program that is very easily scalable and very affordable and attracts students from all walks of life. Just as a note, the national finals for the Future City competition are going to be held this month here in D.C. From the 20th to the 22nd at the Hyatt Regency. So I would really encourage anyone who is in the audience or is listening in the listening audience to take a look at that particular program, because whether you are in a rural area, all it takes is one computer and $25, and you can participate in this program. And it's a very successful program. So I think there are scalable programs out there that, and this happens to be a program that has been brought into the classroom and worked on in technology education classrooms, in science classrooms. I know that NASA has a program which is an aerospace challenge program, which is extremely similar to this in using recycled materials and extremely low cost. So these programs are extremely scalable. They're open to all students and really generate an interest in the STEM fields and STEM careers.
Could you repeat the name of the program?
It's the Future City competition. It's just futurecity.org. You're welcome.
Well, let's open it up to the audience that's braved the chance of ice. Instead, we're going to have a high of 58 degrees today, so my own predictions are not so good. Please, the lady there, and we have a microphone, if you would.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Please identify yourself.
Hello, my name is Janae Sharp-Leach, and I am an Einstein Fellow working at NASA this year. My question is for Terrie, but everybody on the panel too. Building on the point that you were just making, this program is extremely scalable, the Future City, and everybody on the panel has mentioned programs, the Envirothon, the Cyber Warrior thing, and a bunch of other programs. I've never heard of any of them, and yet they're all extremely scalable. Why haven't I heard of them? And what can we do? What are the barriers for spreading the word? And what can we do then to spread the word and go from programs that are potentially scalable to scalable? They have been scaled.
Well, I'll first address that. I think one of the issues that any good educational program deals with is getting someone to acknowledge that it exists. And this is a conversation we've had with the media, that these kinds of programs need to be covered. They need to have national attention. They need to have front page attention, and oftentimes are totally neglected. The media sees more interest in stories that are negative rather than positive. These are very positive programs, and when we're looking at ways that these can be promoted, definitely the media's away. I think the programs themselves, since Future City is a national competition, really can also do possibly a better job of reaching out to schools in sending the notifications out to schools, to states, to STEM teachers that these programs exist.
Gentleman here, and then the lady over there.
I have a follow-up to this question on how information...
Identify yourself.
My name is James Sang. I'm a retired physicist. I have a follow-up on this question on how information and evaluation flows through the system. EPI, or Economic Policy Institute, had a forum last September on what they call junk science in education. And it was basically a pot shot at what Heritage and Cato and AEI put out as policy papers on various kinds of educational innovation. And at the end of it, there seems to be a consensus that there's very little agreement on what good evaluation is, and also Roy Romer complained that there seems to be very little link between people who do things and school boards, i.e. school boards ask questions, and there was very little translation between what good practice and policy are and the kind of information they get. I was wondering whether, is there a need, in fact, for better translation of what works into language for people who make decisions as to what programs get adopted and the like? Or was this unique to the EPI setting in Washington and their unhappiness with AEI and all the other shops?
I'll take a shot at this one. The culture of assessment that we have is not just all, as you are probably aware, it's not all about student success. In some case, now it's being used to measure teacher success and teacher accountability issues. And certainly AYP, is all part of that. I think it's somewhat, from a scientist's perspective, to say that what a student learns in one class is wholly dependent upon that teacher who taught them just for that 1 year is kind of insulting to the rest of the profession, because we all build upon the teachers that came before us in terms of what it is that we accomplish. I would say, if you want to put some sort of standardized test, standardized tests as a way of measuring student student success, then you also need to build in some other factors that are part of that. And we talk about, okay, well, graduation rate, dropout rate, as an example of that. But there also is no way of measuring a program that decreases the dropout rate, because there's always way too many other variables that are part of that. Now, we have heard, as long as teachers have been around, that athletics is a way that you decrease, sports is a way that you decrease dropout rates. Kids will come to school if they're performing in a sport because that's the only place that they can do that. And I actually believe that that is true. But we take that just kind of for granted. I think some of these after-school enrichment stuff that we're talking about, some of these scalable programs that we're talking about, some of these scalable courses also have the same impact, except for they're never measured. And it's almost impossible for them to do it. But anecdotally, it seems that that's some place that you could build an actual test to find out whether or not, it's actually happening, comparing the school that has a program compared to the school that doesn't have a program, et cetera.
There's a lady here, and then the gentleman in the back. I think the lady was next.
Thank you. I'm Mary Lord. I represent this ward in the District of Columbia State Board of Education, and I also write and edit for the American Society for Engineering Education, so STEM is near and dear to my heart. I'd sort of like to follow up on the gentleman's question about policy. Every single panelist has talked about the value of engaging students through experiential learning, whether it's project-based or after school. What recommendations or suggestions can you give policymakers at the state and the national level as we look to reauthorize No Child Left Behind that would remove some of the barriers to embracing experiential learning, and also to start the conversation about how STEM can elevate reading and math scores rather than what we have now is, well, we'd love to give you more science, but we've got to get the kids reading and writing before we can do that. The 40 states and the District of Columbia have embraced the Common Core standards in English language arts and math. This seems like a game changer, but only if the STEM disciplines bring something to the party. So help me think through our next steps so that we can essentially scale up the kinds of programs you've been talking about.
I mean, a big thing that I will just say, my district, as well as a lot of districts across the country, it's all about budget. And with experiential learning, taking the kids out of the classroom, that's an expense. So there has to be some type of funding associated with it, and schools need to get maybe a pot of money that they can use towards field trips and other things. I will say that in my experience, trying to get my kids outside, we don't have buses, so I have to just take them outside, I don't know, in the courtyard or around the street, and then we don't have trees, so how are we going to find a tree to measure to learn these skills? A big thing definitely is recognizing, and I think a big thing within my district is that it always seems like the state and the feds, they keep on saying, we want you to do this, and we want you to do that, but then they don't give us the means to do that. I mean, they had the race to the top, but then we didn't get the money, so we made all these changes, but then we weren't awarded the money, so then how are we supposed to implement these? So they're definitely have to have the money to match what you want us to do.
Just going to say, Lindsay's absolutely correct on that. And, I was just thinking of that thought that just passed through my mind on this. Some of the biggest beneficiaries of having a STEM literate pipeline, STEM literate workforce, is the corporations that are in STEM fields. And, through Change the Equation and other places, they've been starting to get engaged in this. And, there's some money that's trickling through, which has funded some of these after-school programs. That's all good. But in the State of the Union, I also heard the president refer to the idea that, I can't remember the language, so I'm going to just say what I recall, was that perhaps the oil companies should have, an additional tax on them. And so when you think about them as being very, very much involved in STEM fields, I was reading, yesterday Exxon Mobil's first quarter profits $9.3 billion, which means that they make $1 million every 15 minutes, right, in profits. And ExxonMobil funds some stuff in terms of STEM education. It may seem like a lot to a teacher, but when you figure, the percentage of their corporate profitability that they make, it's just a tiny pittance. And so, my policy recommendation to the president from a teacher perspective who's involved in STEM is that if you're going to think about putting a tax on corporate profits for the oil companies, then dedicate a portion of it to STEM fields, because even that is justifiable to certain regards in the American public, that what we're doing is that we're preparing, people who will be able to fill those jobs that would benefit that company. It's an investment. It's not really a tax. Well, that's my thought.
Let me just jump in to mention to everyone that on March 2nd, same time, same place, we'll be looking at partnering with business, the changing role of business in education. And again, we'll have a panel of the Einstein Fellows commenting on that question.
I have a brief comment on that question about policymaking. From my experience, flexibility in policymaking is essential. That in my school, the teachers themselves are empowered to design the curriculum of the school. We don't have our school board or our superintendent saying this is what you will teach. Instead, when we have great ideas, we have the freedom to implement that. At a systemic level, that might be tough, but building in opportunities for flexibility, that schools can be innovative and teachers can be innovative rather than have to live with set curriculum and never have a say in what it is and how it's going to be designed. I think that's important.
It's also important when you're thinking about scalability and sustainability, if program is being developed, that really has to be built in early. It's not just, we have this great program, let's send it out into the world and let other people use it. It's actually something that has to be built into a program initially, so that that design can be used in a variety of situations. It can be adapted, and that's what scalability is really about. It's not just a cookie cutter, let's take it from here and put it over here. It's actually can I take that program from here and make it work in our situation over in this area. And I think that's what makes the successful scaling of a program, is if the initial concept can be built successfully in another place, another school, another state, another country, whatever, but with their, like the corporate culture, with that particular school culture, student culture in mind.
And what about the second question that I believe I heard, which was, what about STEM and reading scores? How does STEM contribute to that other priority of mastering language arts?
Well, since my course is a career and technical education course, we include science, math, reading, writing in the coursework itself. It's not a standalone kind of thing. Today we're doing engineering and there's no math. Of course, you can't do engineering without math. And a lot of courses that are STEM courses are writing. There's a lot of writing. There's a lot of reading, a lot of technical writing and reading that goes on in these courses. And if we're trying to build reading scores and math scores, we should be incorporating that throughout, not just in STEM courses. The English course can be including some technical reading or writing, and all of these should be integrated so that every class is working together to help students achieve. It's not being put all on the math teacher's back or all on the English teacher's back and so on.
Steve, you mentioned that you would have a project that would really be integrated in every discipline in the school. Mm-hmm. How would you, let's say you're working on your cyber warrior question, how does that fit into the English class or, say, the history class?
Okay, well, so the program's called E-Cyber Mission. I don't want people to think that it's all about warriors. It's a mission to change the community. So the way that we approach that is that, and this isn't necessarily with the long-term large projects like that, but even day-to-day stuff. If something's going on in a science or math class, we do our best to try to integrate whatever's happening in there with the other classes. All of our teachers in the building have a common prep time, and the way that we accomplish that is that the first period of every day is taught by not substitute teachers, but guest teachers from throughout the district. So we have a PE teacher who comes in the morning. He's stationed at another school the rest of the day, but for that one period a day, he comes to our building. So every full-time teacher within my building has that common prep time. And that's where we plan and decide how are we going to integrate all of this together. And sometimes we do it through school-wide questions where we pick a focus that every student in the building will be learning about this general question. It could be, how do you know if information is true? I mean, that's one of the questions that we've used in the past. And so then we try to design our curriculum around that question. So in science, we focus on testing and reliability and hypotheses and analysis of data. In language arts, they might focus on the same question, but they would do it through literature. And my struggle has always been that why can't language arts class be about things that we're doing in science class? And I guess that's a little conceited of me because I'm a science teacher by training, and so I think, well, why can't we just do science all the time in every class? And yet I kind of think, why can't we do science all the time in every class? There's so many links between science and English. If kids are doing science but aren't able to communicate results, what's the point of doing the science in the first place? And so teaching kids how to write reports or communicate or build presentations, those are all language arts skills that so aptly apply to the work that's going on in a science class.
You all better get into the Common Core conversation.
Yes, the gentleman there.
And then there's a lady over there who's been very patient that
Yes,
I want to acknowledge. Good morning. My name is Pierce Hammond. I work in the U.S. Department of Education. And I want to bring the conversation back to scalability because it seems to me it's been used in quite a wide variety of ways. And I want to pair it with another S word, which is systemic. And then I want to take the idea of flexibility that we've been talking about and pair it with another F word, which is fidelity. So let me start by saying that it seems to me that if we're talking about something that is culture changing because we're not happy with the results of our educational system, and that could be for a bunch of reasons. One of them has to do with the economy. One of them has to do with the PISA results and the various results, where here's the U.S. in the middle of the pack instead of at the top where we think we belong. Another would have to do, though, with the results for the students and to what extent are the talents that are out there being realized. To what extent are we leaving kids out? Think about gaps in achievement and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of reasons to be dissatisfied with the status quo at this point. And it strikes me that there was a brief touch on systemic earlier. I want to suggest to you that projects of one sort or another aren't going to do the job. That what's needed instead is something that starts with standards and gets them right, and then figures out what's the right curriculum to match that, and then figures out what's the professional development that teachers need to carry out the curriculum according to those standards, and then figures out how do we measure all of that, and then figures out what are the policies we need from the various policymakers at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and then figures out how do we make sure, still now talking policy, that we don't have competing reforms where we're trying to do things, but we're tripping over ourselves on it, and then figures out how to make sure the community's on board so it doesn't get in the way, but in fact works towards the same end, and that our policymakers are in tune with our community. That's not a small matter, obviously. I trust you all see. And then there's the question of, well, given all of that complicated stuff, what does scalability mean? Scaling up a project so that everybody's doing, pick your favorite, the city one that you were talking about before, that's fine. And that, pardon me, is relatively trivial compared to getting all of the rest of that going, I think, on a more systemic frame. I'm interested in your perspective on that, and I want to point out, now to go to the two F words, that it strikes me at least that there's a trade-off between flexibility and fidelity. If I've really got a model, if I've really got something that addresses all of the major issues that I've got, there's got to be some fidelity to that model if we're going to scale it. On the other hand, we live in a real world where my city isn't your city, and so there's going to have to be flexibility. How do you do that? Thank you.
I would just like to address one piece of that, because I know others can address the others better. I teach with standards. I choose to teach project-based because it engages students, and it also is a way for students to learn more than standards, for them to learn those 21st century skills that they will need to be successful when they graduate from school. But standards are the core of what I teach, and it's just a matter of allowing schools, allowing teachers the flexibility, since we want to include that word, to be able to assess their student population's needs and be able to present a lesson in what they see as the most effective way for those students to be successful with that material. Any approach that comes with a cookie cutter attached is not going to have the impact that it's looking for, because our kids can't be compartmentalized. We can't say that our students are those cookie cutter type of students. Our schools aren't. Our teachers aren't. We all have the standards as our basis, but what we do with those is definitely the way for students to be successful.
I would take a similar approach. I mean, here's the reality, in regards to the teacher perspective, or my life as a teacher. I've been waiting all my life for standards. I've been waiting for a national core standard since I started teaching right after A Nation at Risk. And I'll probably retire before that happens. And I would say also that, I teach a course that doesn't have standards. Environmental science is not part of the core. Those elective programs that I've, started, including ones in my past that I've started for years and years and years, they don't have standards either. And one of the things about standards that really bothers is that it establishes a baseline, but I want to do more than the standards. And so I need that flexibility, which you mentioned, in order to do that. But I think, the idea of waiting for standards to occur and then developing everything hanging on the standards is a little hard for some teachers to take, because it implies that the folks up here know basically what needs to be done on a day-to-day basis in a teacher's life. And reality is that we're trying to do the best we can using all the tools in our tool belt in order to make sure that the kids come out in a way that's going to make them productive members of society, graduate on time, have the 21st century skills that, yes, are general, but still are good targets for us to reach. So I guess I wasn't really following exactly what you're saying in terms of how to implement these things in regards to standards. I would say this: if I have an environmental engineering course and I teach that to a kid, that kid's going to know a lot more about engineering because that course was available for him in my school than obviously any kid in any other school that doesn't have that course that's there. And if we say standards is everything, teachers won't invent those elective classes, won't invent those choice classes for those special kids to find those niches.
I'll say from my experience, which is just one experience, is that this model of the feds telling the state and the state telling the superintendents and then the superintendent telling the principal and then the principal finally getting down to the teacher and saying, hey, you need to do this in your classroom, that by the time it's gone through that huge chain of communication it tends to be something completely different. And so I think this top-down approach to education reform it doesn't work, because it ends up being on the teacher to do all these things without the funding, without the resources, without the professional development. The things that I've seen in my district that have been the most effective have been the opposite, the bottom-up approach, where the teachers, and maybe it's a SIT committee, so a school improvement team, that they recognize somewhere in their school that it needs to be improved. So, for instance, an example of my school is that we had a huge problem with freshman achievement, that our freshmen, they were 30% in 2005 were failing 2 or more classes. And so that's 30% of our students that right from the start of their high school career were lacking the credits that they need for graduation. And since they started out on the wrong foot, they weren't going to graduate, and so that had a big effect on our graduation rate. And so the teachers took it upon themselves to say, what can we do about this problem to make students more successful in their freshman year? And so we found a program that could work. It's called the Link Crew, or the Boomerang organization, and it's really cool that every freshman, we do an awesome orientation for them. Every freshman gets a mentor that's a junior or senior, and they have a homeroom class together, so they meet with them every day. They help them study. They help them make sure they know how to get around school, what classes to take, and it really had a profound effect. In our first year, that percentage of 30% of freshmen failing 2 or more classes dropped to only 8%. And then in the following year, it went down to 6%, and it stayed about the same. We went from having the worst freshman success in the county to having the best freshman success just through one program. And I think that because it was the teachers identifying where they wanted to make a change in the school and then incorporating the students and making it a school culture change, that had profound effects in that school. And then those effects went on to improvements in classroom performance, in discipline, and other things. So I just think that this total top-down approach, it leads to a lot of resentment and a lot of feeling like you're imposed to do something, whereas if it's the school districts having the flexibility to make changes in their district that they deem are important and are appropriate, then that is a lot more successful.
The infuriating thing about education is that kids are not products, kids are people. And so the work that works with one student does not work with another student, even though you would expect, well, it's the same curriculum, and this kid comes from a generally similar background, and yet you get completely different results. And so the idea that some sort of nationalized curriculum or that this is the solution, I don't think there can ever be a solution. And in fact, saying that there is a solution is antithetical to that. That the way that our schools will be successful is by giving options to kids, that there are many different ways of learning and there are many different types of students, and by giving students choice and having many different types of schools and curricula that they can choose from, I think that's the way that we make a difference for kids.
The lady over here.
Yes, good morning. My name is Dorothy Douglas. I'm on the State Board of Education. My colleague, I just spoke earlier. Well, all what you're saying is so truthfully, because kids every child is unique in their own way, so you really have to set up a learning process for them to be successful and making sure that it happens. I just want to highlight on a little bit about how we need to get together to engage our parents more. I didn't hear that at all, and that is so very important that we allow our parents to be involved. And I know you're going to have something on March the 2nd in reference to partnership with the others. But you have so much that's out here. You have Walmart, you have Costco's, and all these other partnerships that would be more than happy to work with our kids in the educational field and making sure they be successful from here and through college. So I think by connecting with these community businesses and partnership would really help out a lot. And the old-fashioned way is fundraisers. So this would allow a lot of things to help our kids to be going these field trips. That's really important for them to learn. So I would definitely would like to see that. And even with the churches, because they're very helpful as well, because the churches can use their buses to bus our kids to the schools and those things. So it's just a matter of asking, because we just had a meeting the other day at Keller Miller School saying how important it is. And one gentleman came up, we're looking for computers in the school. And he said, well, hey, I'm willing to give computers. So just a matter of just asking sometime to help our kids. So we need to do that in connecting and partnership. And most important, our parents are really our kids' goals that we want to make sure that they're there to support our children. So because the parents know, and we want them to make sure they be successful. So truly, this is what I wanted to say about our young kids, because as together we all are teams, and we need to work together in unity to make sure they be successful. Thank you.
I definitely agree that these students, that they are a product of the community that they live in. Being from the Detroit area right now, that we're seeing huge problems with people in the community valuing education, and it needs to be a community response and the changing of the community to say that education needs to be a priority, and that starts with the churches and the businesses and the organizations that are definitely a part of that community, to start with those kids and say that education needs to be a priority, and to give the parents the resources that they need to do that. Just a couple of things about that is that in the Detroit area, some of the things that there are the partnerships with businesses to ensure that. But there's still, I mean, there's that mentality that, hey, my parents, they got these jobs without a high school degree. They worked in the factories, but now those factory jobs don't exist anymore. So how can we change that mentality in a community? And it's hard, but it definitely needs to be done, especially in these industrialized cities.
Another aspect that helps bring communities and schools together, a concept that we have in Arizona, not widespread, but it's certainly growing, is something called school as community. And oftentimes, you know, at the end of the school day, when the school closes, the gate closes, and the school facility is this, you know, shadow in the community, where the school as community idea keeps the school facilities open on certain nights of the week to allow families to come in and use the library, use the computer facilities that are there, for parents to be able to take some classes, for students to be able to get some tutoring, to just open up the school to the community so that the school is seen as a partner with the parent rather than, okay, I send my child to the school from 8 to 3, and then after that it's my job again. It's more of a partnership. And I think that community aspect is real important in helping parents to be engaged with their students in school and coming alongside the school.
And that's so true, because you have to teach the child as well as the family. They all go hand in hand together.
Gentleman there, and then the lady in the front.
Hi, my name is Fred Belmont. I'm an Einstein Fellow. First of all, I want to say you guys are great. When we talk about scalability, we talk about programs of scalability, and I'm thinking it's really not the programs that we need to scale, it's the teachers that we need to scale up. I've never been associated with a group of teachers that have been a higher quality, smarter group of people, harder working, all the good things about it. How do we get more teachers like you guys, all the people around the table? Because these programs that you want to scale up, if you don't have the teachers behind them, they're not going to be able to do it. I've worked in a school, not my current school, thank goodness, where one of the math teachers came to me and said, Fred, what's slope again? Is it the change in y over change in x, or the change in x over change in y? So you could put all these great programs together, and I'm not sure they'd be successful at all. So how do we get the right people? It's not necessarily always the smartest people, but it's the people that have that set of skills, that the intellect, the ambition, the drive, the caring about kids, willing to put in the extra time, et cetera, et cetera. How do we do that?
Three quick little thoughts. First off, if you want to get better teachers in the profession, look at Finland. That's kind of the big buzz. Talked about that before. I think if you want to get more teachers who are good teachers involved in some of these programs, you've got to support them, which means that you've got to have the academic climate in the building where academics are actually, valued compared to other aspects of the program. And then thirdly, if you're going to ask teachers to do more, then you should really think about the fact that there needs to be some sort of carrot in order to get some of those to do that. And if that's in a, release time model, if it's in, a stipend model, both of those things could be really valuable. I have a good friend of mine who was a great first robotics, coach, who stopped after, doing it for 2 years because he was, his teams were going to national and he was funding his great deal of it through his own, pocket. He was losing $1,000 a year in order to do it. I think that's been replayed all across, the United States. And so if we value these things, let's pay for them.
I think, too, that one of the aspects involved is that teachers themselves, there's something within us that we feel we want to contribute to our students, and we will do it regardless of what it takes. I know that one of the issues that has been under discussion are the education programs at universities that students go through. And I think that those programs really need to be revamped because we aren't addressing what needs to take place in the classroom so much through those programs. And so the teachers coming in don't have the same kind of initiative to be able to innovate and bring the kind of change that needs to take place. And so it's got to be in conjunction with our teacher education programs as well as the districts, and what do they need, what do the states need. I mean, we can't do it alone, and right now we still have too much siloing. We've got the Department of Education in Washington that says, here we go, and then it comes down to the state that says, here we go, and so on. And when you are from a state that doesn't value education and the education funding gets shifted off somewhere else because there's this bill to pay, and look at the big pot in education, and we'll just take from there and expect the programs and the successes to take place anyway. It won't happen.
I think we need a shift in the way we ourselves view the job. I think most teachers, from my experience, see time in the classroom as the real work, and time spent in meetings or with other teachers or during collaboration as external. And, I just got to, I got real kids coming to a real classroom, and that's where the real work is. And so for me, it was eye-opening being in a building where all the teachers are available at the same time to talk about stuff, and we meet regularly. We bring samples of student work. We talk about projects that we're doing individually, and having that be part of the expectation that I am not just spending my days working with kids, but part of my true responsibility is to build new programs and work with other staff. I think that was a real shifting point in my own career. My first year teaching, I worked in a traditional high school. I felt like I was just a part of the machine. I didn't have a say in the way that things operated. I was ready to quit after my first year. I found another job. And wow, this is a totally new way of doing education and doing school. And it was exciting being able to feel like my ideas had a real place there. And so by building that structure into our classrooms and schools around the United States, that it's not just about teaching kids, but give teachers time during the day, not just for prep periods when they get ready for the kids that are coming, but also time during the day to meet with colleagues and talk about programs. That's an important way that we can change.
I think there's also a big role in this is teacher professional development, and having teachers feel prepared to want to do these programs or even learn about the programs in the first place. Unfortunately, what I've seen in Michigan and in our district is that as budgets are slashed, the first thing to go is professional development money. And so what results in that is that now you have the mentality in your school of, well, we're just good with what we're doing. That is, if there's not professional development, there's never that striving to greatness, that there's no sense of wanting to improve. So I definitely think that having the funding and having the emphasis on continuing the education of teachers and offering them professional development through their districts instead of saying, well, you're on your own, go do it, that has a huge effect on the school community and on what programs you can do in that school.
The lady here.
I'm Tina King, and I'm an Einstein Fellow with research on gender in science and engineering. And for me, one of the scariest things of all is the fact that in our culture that we feel that failure is a bad thing, and it's a message that we're sending to our students that failure is a bad thing. And if you look back over your own, every learning that you've ever done, sometimes, the most of the time I think when you fell, that's when your greatest learning took place. And the biggest thing is to change the culture and to try to address these issues that are the barriers that we're giving to the students and we're sending down to students, is that if you keep the effort and, persisting, that if they can see that they can get through this and then they learn to think about it, then it's far greater than if the test. Because if you have a student take a test and they scored really low in math or science, it just gives you the test score. But you don't even address the barriers of why. Why? Was it because they, had a bad home life, or that they didn't have eyeglasses, or that there was a shooting going on, or whatever it was, or that maybe they didn't have there was a stereotype there. So if you start to address what the true issues are, if a student has failed, and here's my question, is that if a student has failed, instead of looking at the failure, if you immediately do what like Lindsay said, you go in, you give the teachers that freedom to go in to address the true needs immediately. And this is where it's like you almost set up where the student has to fail before you help them and prevent it, and that's where I think, how would you help that culture change where failure isn't seen as a bad thing, it's seen as the first step toward improving. And it's a message that we need to give our kids and change. So I know, like when we had the PISA report and you had those schools, you had 2 schools on there, and both times the students said that they knew when they came in, what made them successful is that they knew ahead of time they were going in to work hard. And somehow we're missing that. We're saying, what is everybody else going to do for the students? But the message the students have to get is that they've got to be part of this, that buy-in, what you're talking about, and why that's so important for them to buy in. So how would you address the culture? Because if you can't change that, then how can you make professional development, and you have to have professional development in it as well. But if you have a nation of students, if you compare us to China, and China already comes in where those students are ready to learn, where they come in America, and part of your job as a teacher is to get them ready and motivated to learn, you lose time that way.
In a sense, you're asking, and I would share this request, for a change in national culture, that you often get what you celebrate. And we don't always celebrate the inventor, the creator, or the person who has worked hard to overcome.
Right.
Sometimes we do. I know that often when the National Medals of Science and Technology are awarded and you read through what these individuals have done and the implications for the society and the economy and often really for the world, and yet the next day there may be no coverage in the major newspapers. So we do need to work on that celebrating. It's striking in other cultures where we're worried, as Steve is, about individual students and their motivation and the importance of inspiration. Yet you look at Japan, which generally has a very successful record as measured by things like the PISA exam. That's not the whole story. They worry about creativity, but certainly in terms of standard learning, they do very well. And they study the same thing, same time, same week, and so forth and so on. Or in Singapore, the key is not only Singapore math, which is spreading here, but at least in asking someone from their Department of Education, what is the real key? And he said it's the aspirations of the students. To a person, they feel that math and science are critical for their future and for Singapore's future. So we need to recapture some of that post-Sputnik sense. The president talked about this
We need to
being
find the balance.
A Sputnik moment, and certainly after Sputnik, there was just this enormous emphasis on math, science, and foreign languages. I went back to look at my high school yearbook, and there was the math club in Pendleton, Oregon. Why was that math club important? Because of Sputnik.
Right.
So we need to, I think, recapture some of that. I didn't mean to preempt you.
Yeah, but the students need a vision, and how do you give them that vision?
I think one of the things that we've been able to do at our school is that we're not one of the highest performing schools when it comes to standardized tests. So instead, what we have focused on is character development and how can we treat students as individuals and build their character. So even if they don't go on to college or associate's degree, if they're just going to go straight into the workforce, at least we've made adults out of them, and that they can be successes in that way. So that's one of the things. And that may, in the long run, help us with standardized tests, just because maybe that will give them the respect and the responsibility to want to do better on tests. But we definitely do a lot of character development is where our focus is.
In another, I'm just going to, just before I forget, it's another field, the American attitude toward failure is often viewed as one of our successes in innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So you will see, you could point to Silicon Valley, where you'll hear an announcement that X or Y has just had this terrific breakthrough, an IPO and so forth, on the 7th try. So there were failures, sometimes failures almost the credential of entry into the next effort. Scientists, engineers often would talk about failure as a learning experience. So there would be a way to characterize failure if we followed your idea of then saying, okay, how do we learn from that failure, and how do we build towards success? Sorry, Terrie.
Well, one great example is Thomas Edison, who took over 100 tries easily before he finally came up with a correct cotton filament that would work in his incandescent bulb. But he didn't see those other methods as failures. They were simply ways that didn't work on his way to being successful to find that. And that's really something that we have to help our students understand, that there's a lot of ways of going about things, at trying that sometimes the teaching method in the classroom is looking for a right answer, and that doesn't engage students in thinking. It makes them think there's only one way versus, what's another way that this might work. When we look at the successful programs throughout the world, we look at the Finnish, the Singapores, the Japans, whatever, what we're seeing is a culture where the families, the parents, respect education, and they ingrain that in their students from an early age, that respect. And that's one concept that we're missing here in the United States. If we want to try and instill that culture, then it's actually going to have to come from the family. It's going to have to start at that point, so that students, as they are growing up and as they enter school, have that idea that education is valued. And this is, I had a parent tell me one time that I had to earn their child's respect. And so if you get the parent, the culture turned around, and that's a big deal to turn around a whole culture. We're also talking about smaller countries in numbers, in size. Mike, you were comparing Finland to the state of Washington? That Finland is about the size of the state of Washington. So if we're looking at scaling a program or turning around a program based on one country that is, a small piece of what the United States represents, we're looking at a much bigger challenge.
The gentleman there.
Hi, my name is Tim Spuck. I'm an Einstein Fellow. I have actually two questions, and so I'll get those both out to you, and then I'm interested in your comments. Question number one, and it's been brought up here, that community is extremely important, especially if you're talking about innovation or you're talking about making changes and then making those changes scalable over across a large area. So what role do you think, I guess the point that community valuing education has been an issue, and I think that's something nationwide. In many of the communities, we don't seem to have people who value teachers or who value education the way that they used to. What role do you think the fact that kids are going off to college, coming back, and not having jobs plays in that? And then I want to take and extend that to, so should any sort of reform incorporate as an end product that we get kids properly placed after they leave high school? For example, how many kids are going to college that would be much more successful going into a 2-year technical program and actually coming out, gaining employment, and then furthering their education down the road? So I think, what role does that play in a community or as a nation possibly not valuing education as much as we once did? And my second question deals with, this idea of project-based learning and, after-school types of activities was brought up previously. As part of one of my graduate classes, I did a quick study just looking at how is class rank impacted by learning style, and took a look at students across the board. They got them categorized into one of 4 learning styles and then compared that to their class rank. And we know that class rank impacts the future of a student. It impacts the scholarships that you're going to get. It impacts your future, where you're going to end up. And what I found in that real brief study was that, hey, you look at the top 25% of kids, and the vast majority of them, their learning style is conducive to a lecture-style format, where teachers are up in front of the classroom presenting that sort of a format. If you look at the bottom 50% of class rank, the vast majority of them are people that learn by hands-on experience, or that learn by this sort of project-based style learning. And I guess my question is then, if you look at that, there's a unconscious discrimination that's taking place then across the board in education, because we constantly are perpetuating the people who, to the top, whose learning styles actually are conducive to, hey, let's get in front of the classroom and let's teach, and you learn from lecture, you take notes and you test, and that's great. So I go back to these after-school types of activities, or these project-based learning. But in the after-school types of activities, which would be conducive to these kids who do more hands-on style learning, should that impact their class rank? Should that go into the formula? For example, if you're looking at a class rank for a school, should it also include out-of-school activities as part of gauging what an individual's class rank is? So those are the two questions.
Tim, I'll answer your first question. How about that? The one about placement. So what I've seen in my students is that they like to have that carrot there to know that the efforts that they're putting in, that they're going to get something out of it. So I see a lot of my kids that we have a lot of CTE or career technical education classes where they can do auto shop or culinary arts and get a certificate that they can use right when they graduate, and those are where the jobs are at, and they can have jobs available. So I see a lot of kids will go into those programs because it's safe, that they know that there's a job there. And it kind of is disappointing for me sometimes, because there are very, very intelligent kids that go into those programs that I know could possibly go to college and do other things, but they go the safe route. So I definitely agree with you that having something available where it's like that carrot at the end that, yeah, if you go to this 4-year school, you can have this job at the end, and this job will be available, and educating kids on careers and
what it takes to get a career and what careers are available for when they do graduate. So I definitely think that it's a good idea.
I'll try to go with question 2. I don't think that things that happen outside of schools should be part of class rank, but I do think we need to reevaluate the way that we rank students. I know that in many classrooms, coming to class and sitting quietly and minding your own business and being a good student gets you a good grade in the class, and it has nothing to do. I mean, there might be some portion that you have to perform acceptably well on assessments, but it's not about what you learn. It's a lot about behavior. The whole idea of getting an A for good behavior tends to reinforce that model, that the kids that have the ability to sit quietly and not pester their neighbor tend to get higher grades and then higher class rank. And so I guess the thing I like about project-based learning is that by nature it has to be about what kids actually can do and can accomplish. It's not about the behavior. I mean, we get a lot of kids that choose our school because they're extremely rambunctious. They're not successful in a traditional environment. They cannot sit still for 5 minutes. And so giving them an opportunity to actually be active learners changes the way that they view school, but it also changes the way that they're learning, because our focus has to be on what they've actually gained during the experience. You can't measure through project-based learning whether or not a kid sits still at a table for 3 hours at a time, which is sometimes the measurement that we use elsewhere. So the having kids at the lower rank of the class versus the higher rank of the class, I don't know that I necessarily agree with any of that, because I don't know that class rank is for sure a good indicator of what kids are actually capable of.
I'm going to go with the second question too, Tim. I think from a high school teacher perspective, it's different, of course, in middle schools and other schools. But from a high school teacher perspective, I think that we offer classes that are lecture based. We offer classes that are project based. We offer classes that are someplace in between. The kids will tend to, on their courses that are their electives, they'll tend to fall into those classes that kind of meet their learning style. I think there tends to be those classes that are college prep based classes, that kids who are going to go to college, that tend to have a greater percentage that are lecture based classes. And so therefore kids who are going to go to college end up taking those particular classes. That's set by the state, the minimum required type of classes that you have to take, in order to go into college. I think there's beginning in certain states a little bit of a breakdown that kids can take alternative paths and be rated as well as when they do their admissions. And so, but what hasn't really happened, and it's what I've said a number of times today, is that there aren't the offerings there for the kids to take those particular classes, which are academic in nature, but project-based, that don't have to get concerned about standards, which tends to sometimes make them more lecture-based. The environmental engineering class that I've mentioned before, there's no reason why that particular course couldn't count as a course for admissions to college that would be similar to, say, a course like chemistry, that some kid can't take because they didn't get the math prerequisites in order to get there. And it's a project-based class, and we lose those kids because we say, well, if you take this class, you're going to the community college track rather than the 4-year track. So if the colleges enabled more flexibility in regards to how they did their admission standards, which some private colleges do, but most public colleges really don't, then I think you could see a little bit of a change of that particular culture. On the idea of coming up, giving some sort of ability to have a kid who's like in an after-school enrichment class get some sort of points or something, to help them through the admissions. That's an interesting idea. I just don't really see how it can be kind of implemented unless that program was embedded in a particular class. So, we're now offering a class on robotics, right? So, again, it's not accepted as, say, an admissions credit class, but it's really hands-on. So we're trying to get those after-school kids who are doing the first robotics now to be in a class to do it. We mentioned that before, too, so.
The aspect of class ranking with the activities, I disagree with. The reason I disagree with it is because currently a large number of universities are not looking at a student's academic performance as the only criteria for admission. We can probably look at a number of high schools and see students who get straight A's all through. Well, are they taking AP classes, or are they just taking the basics and getting A's? Well, they end up with a similar GPA. What does that tell you? But universities are using another criteria, and that criteria is, how can this student contribute to our campus? How can, what does a student bring to our university? And in that regard, they are looking at, what has the student done? What are those extracurricular things, the volunteering, the work experiences, the clubs and so on that the students have participated in prior to their entry experience to a university, that are being looked at much more heavily now. And so to kind of go with that, I think that universities are looking at that in regard, but not necessarily tying it in with class rank. So.
We'll get a microphone here just a sec.
I know we mentioned earlier about teaching the whole family and also connecting with the whole family and the student. But, truancy is another issue that really needs to be addressed with our young people from elementary school, middle school, up into high school. Now, truancy plays a very important role on a lot of students, and this is where the dropout comes in, because if we don't know what's happening within our families, that really to address those issues, we cannot address our families, because it could be a whole lot of issues. Hungry, the Health Act with the President Obama, Miss Obama, Michelle Obama is really pushed forward now. We have a lot of kids that are coming to school that actually are hungry. I know they have the programs in there, but the question is, are they getting enough healthy foods to get them through, to get their little minds to work? So we need to look at all those issues. We need to know that a lot of the parents are drug addicts, and other little issues that are going on there. So we really need to evolve ourselves around our willingness to make sure that all our kids are being addressed with families and in the community. So we all have to work together. So keep down truancy, and truancy does play a major part. But the question is, how do you address it? Do you have the truancy officer take the kids away? Because now they can take the children away and put them in foster care. Those things need to be really addressed. Take another route. Why put a child in foster care or have the officer come to get them when you can just bring in the parents and address those issues and find out what is really happening within the homes that they might need. It might be the electricity might be out, or the gas, or something that's not in that home. Because in my neighbor, there was a lady that actually did not have gas. Her gas had been cut off, but you would never know it. But as a person in the community observed this, so they went to school and they were dressed. She tried to dress them warm, but the kids needed heat. So those are the things that we need to really get involved that would cause truancy. And they'll say, well, I don't want to be involved because we're hungry and we don't have the proper clothing and we don't have the proper heating and utilities to keep us warm. So we need to really address those issues. That's really important. The question, how do you address truancy? Thank you.
That's one of the things that we see that I think is scalable about some of the international programs that have been successful, is that they take into consideration everything about the family. They work with the families. They take into account the students' health, their nutrition, all of those aspects in a couple of the international programs in Finland. India has programs like that where that whole situation accounts for the success of the program. And so that's definitely something that we can take away as scalable, is are we looking at the whole child? Are we looking at the whole family in how we go about determining what we can do for improving the success of our students?
I think, also, I think you hit on a topic that is very, very important, that we just don't look sometimes very, very deeply at in the education perspective. Having a child come to school on a full stomach is a very, very critical success measure or criteria in terms of whether they're going to be successful. We've had programs in the past, and the First Lady has initiated, another program that enables us to be able to feed students before they start the school day. And that's another reason, of course, to get kids who sometimes don't want to come to school to come to school. The problem is we're not reaching enough of those kids. And, we estimate in our school that our free and reduced lunch population is 50% underrepresented. And that's because we have a fair amount of migrant population and immigrant populations who don't want to fill out the forms in order to qualify because either it's too complicated or they don't know about that. And we don't have an outreach program, to do that. So I think we really have to make that a priority in the country. On the home heating thing, some of us probably have seen this. Joe Kennedy has a program that he works out with Citgo, the Venezuelan oil company that gives low-income people heating allowances to run fuel oil into their houses. Why aren't the other oil companies? Why aren't the American oil companies, helping out as well? Because if one oil company is able to do that, and whatever the reason it is, and they're a foreign country, it makes the American business sector look kind of poor in perspective.
We have actually, we'll take one last question. We've actually reached the witching hour, but please, let's have that last question.
Good morning. My name is Sierra, and I'm actually an intern. I'm from South Carolina, and I'm working with the National Association of State Boards of Education. And I just actually wanted to share something with you all, maybe something we could maybe use, or just something something I experienced being a first-generation college student, because we've touched a lot on college and whatnot. I'm a sociologist major, and I really am passionate about social mobility. And basically, I'll define that as being able to, go from one social aspect and, move up the social ladder. And for many, moving away from adverse situations and adverse backgrounds and using their education to get them where they need to be to, a better situation. And basically, like with myself, I said I'm a first-generation college student, and how that happened for me was really through a bridge program. And I know someone touched on that earlier. Basically, a program that began in South Carolina by just a woman who saw that there were students in South Carolina who were starting at different starting points. All the students in South Carolina weren't getting, the best educations or coming from the same socioeconomic background. So she actually funded a program at a local university for students who had potential, but their circumstances outdistanced their potential, to come each summer and to learn about financial aid and college, because a lot of students don't know. They don't know the process. We don't know financial aid. It's a big process. I had never even been to a college game before enter into this program. So I was admitted into the program. It's a bridge program offered at a local college in South Carolina, and it gave me the opportunity. It was for every summer during my high school career to learn about that whole process. Got the exposure you talked about, being able to get outside of our community and see different different colleges and different places outside of where you're from. And then another thing is, how do you carry yourself? Because there was a show back in the day that used to come on called It's a Different World, and they were referring to college. And it is a different world. You got to know how to carry yourself, how to dress, how to talk. I mean, it's just just so many things that we have to learn, and that program really helped us, learn that. It fostered that because, like I said, a lot of students' parents didn't go to college, never really been outside of their communities. So we got to kind of step out of our communities and know how to act, and whatever the case may be. That's very important. And like I said, this program is funded. It got very popular, and now we got like a $3.4 million grant because we had such a big success rate. We had a student graduate and go to Harvard University. We have a wonderful success rate with that program. But basically, I just want to let you all know that, social mobility is something you also should look at. The fact that these students coming from adverse backgrounds, and I think you all are doing a wonderful job with I took so many notes. I don't have no more paper to use, but look at me now. I'm in Washington, D.C. My first in my family to get out the South, which is great. So I'm in the city, and I'm trying to learn. And, I just want to thank you all, the policymakers and, educators, everyone here, the Department of Education, for trying. I know the budget we're trying to work on those things, but I really appreciate it as a student, being able to be up here. I got a full scholarship to college, and because of the program, taught me how to apply for financial aid and all that. So I just want you all to know that, we greatly appreciate it, and I hope that, I can be as much of a help as I can as an intern and hopefully make a difference like you all are doing. So that's all I really wanted to, add. So you're welcome.
A wonderful ending note, I think, just on being.
Yeah.